Alright. Blessing of Benzine Locke is a 1-mana instant. Target creature gets +2/+1 until end of turn. If it's legendary, it also gains lifelink. Is a pretty medium combat trick. Generally, you want your combat tricks to be able to protect you want your creature to survive the combat, so you like combat tricks that give it toughness. Combining this with a creature with high toughness and having the power go up to kill the opposing creature maybe works, but this seems like a reasonably medium combat trick, definitely for limited only. We'll have to see how the numbers line up, what kind of creatures are commonly played. Will determine in large amount of how good this combat trick ends up being. And the fact that it gives lifelink on legends is like reasonable upside, can help you in a race. Makes this card a really good like pseudo burn spell. You can use it proactively. So Cabal Evangel is a 2-mana 2/2 human cleric. It's a grizzly bear. I don't know if human or cleric type lines matter. But yeah, this is a 2-mana 2/2. If you need a 2-drop, take it. If you don't, don't. Cabal Paladin. 4-mana 4/2 human knight. Whenever you cast a historic spell, Cabal Paladin deals 2 damage to each opponent. Now this could potentially... We saw like a lot of other like kind of potential like recursion loop cards. Maybe there might be a deck there. If there is, this is probably how you win the game. If you can just keep recasting artifacts, deal 2 damage to your opponent each time, with some scrap trawler loop, yeah, they're going to get the business. He's obviously very fragile, dies to magma spray. That's the only use I could see for this card in Constructed, if he's part of some win the game combo with a recursion loop of artifacts. In Limited, it's like not going to really have profitable attacks into a whole bunch of anything. We've seen a lot of 2-power 2-drops, a lot of 2-power 3-drops. This card seems to trade down a very high percentage of the time. He does give you a bit of reach through his historic spell trigger, so maybe you'll begrudgingly play this card. If you can play some combat tricks, maybe ones that give more toughness than the one we just looked at, this card becomes better, but it seems pretty medium and limited. But maybe we'll kill people as part of some combo. Calico Skin Witch is a 2-mana 1/3 with kicker of 4. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you may have your opponent discard 2 cards. Like we talked about, flexibility on the kicker cards is worth a huge amount. This one is, the rates on both sides are pretty bad though. So even given the flexibility, I'm not sure it bridges the gap. Talking about for limited, this is obviously not really playable and Constructed. So it's possible you play this card if you're desperate for 2-drops, if you're trying to play a slow game. Sure, this guy could be a blocker early. If you rip him late, might be good. Obviously, discard gets much worse later in the game, especially in Limited, because people aren't really going to be holding cards. They're not going to have cards to hold. They're just going to be playing stuff in a very high percentage of cases. So this card I don't think is actually very good, as much as I do like Kicker and Limited. Cast Down. Cast Down is a 2-mana instant that destroys target non-legendary creature. This could be one of the premier removal spells in Standard, based upon how things flesh out. If Lyra and Zahid and Demon Lord Benzine Locke, who we'll get to, end up being common staples in the format, like alongside Scarab God and Hazret, then Cast Down gets a bunch worse. But there are some things that Cast Down deals with efficiently. Most 3-drops, most 2-drops, Glory Bringer, stuff like that. If the format is more about those creatures, then Cast Down becomes very good. It's unclear at this point what the format will be about, what creatures will be common, but this is certainly a very powerful tool for black decks to have access to. It's going to be a relevant removal spell you have to account for when building your deck, and it will punish certain metas based upon how things flesh out. So we'll have to see how things lay after people start developing decks, what the density of legends are, how common they are, etc. That'll determine in large part the power level of Cast Down. Chainer's Torment. Chainer's Torment is a bit of a meme. Chainer's Torment does a bunch of nonsense things. It is a 4-mana saga. Chapters 1 and 2 deal 2 damage to your opponent, and you gain 2 life each time. Each opponent for multiplayer games. And Chapter 3 creates an XX Black Nightmare Horror Creature token, where X is half your life total rounded up, and then it deals X damage to you. So, the way this card works. So say you go through the first couple chapters, you gain some life. Say when Chapter 3 resolves, you are at 20. What would happen is you would get a 10/10 creature that would then deal 10 to you, putting you down to 10, and that's the whole joke. So you could potentially get a large vanilla creature with this. I don't think it's going to be very common because your opponent is like playing a game 2. They're probably going to be attacking you, probably dealing damage. And the creature has to be really big for all of this investment to be worth it. And I think in a very high percentage of cases, the creature is not going to be big enough for all of this effort you put into it. So Shader's Torment, not something I'm super interested in, something I think is super powerful. But maybe if you get cute and try and gain a bunch of life and make the dude like super big and they don't have removal, and it'll be sweet. But not something I'm particularly interested in playing. Dark Bargain. Dark Bargain's a very interesting card. Dark Bargain is a 4-mana instant that allows you to look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand, and the other into the graveyard. Dark Bargain then deals 2 damage to you. So Dark Bargain is kind of like a Glimmer of Genius for black. It's a relevant thing to have that effect, to have that card draw. Granted, it deals damage to you. You don't get to see as many cards. You get to see 3 as opposed to 4 potentially from Glimmer with the scry triggers. But it's in black. This is a color combination that doesn't usually have access to this type of effect. And so you can play like a black-green controlling deck and still have access to this effect. So you're not at a disadvantage within the card draw department. This may allow for certain archetypes to exist that didn't previously. You now have instant speed card draw to punish people for not playing into your removal or what have you. So a very specific set of decks would want this, specifically decks not playing blue because Glimmer of Genius is better. But I do think it's cool that black now has access to this effect and can leverage it in archetypes like black-green or Jund or black-white, etc. Deathbloom Thallid. Deathbloom Thallid is a 3-mana 3/2 fungus. Deathbloom Thallid dies, create a 1/1 green Sapperling creature token. There is a bit of a Sapperling sub-theme in Dominaria that we see, mainly when we get into green. There are a few black cards that synergize with it as well. This one seems a little bit below rate. It actually seems okay in limited. It trades with a lot, gives you a 1/1 on the back end. That's not the worst thing in the world. For constructed, though, there appear to be better options for them as far as I've seen so far. So probably not going to be something we're going to be seeing in the constructed Sapperling deck, but seems like a reasonable card in limited. Just a 3 toughness or 3 power dude that trades with a lot, gets a 1/1 in the back end. Seems reasonable. Demonic Vigor. Demonic Vigor is a 1-mana enchantment aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1. When enchanted creature dies, return that card to its owner's hand. This is reasonable. If they don't immediately kill the thing you're targeting with this, when you play it, that creature's now coming back. So if you ever get your opponent to tap out, you can sneak this in for 1 mana, make your dude bigger, and then when they kill it, it comes back. That seems like an actually reasonably powerful effect in limited, especially considering how many legends are going to be in limited format that have specific effects that you may value, that you want to recur, etc. So this art actually seems fine. Obviously, you have to play around removal, not get blown out by having them kill it in response to the spell fizzles, but this seems like not the worst card I've ever seen in my life. Ooh, and now here's my fave. This is the card I'm going to be playing a lot of. Demon Lord Belzenlocke. It's a 6-mana 6/6 legendary elder demon with flying and trample. When Demon Lord Belzenlocke enters the battlefield, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. Then put that card in your hand. If the card's converted mana cost is 4 or greater, repeat the process. Demon Lord Belzenlocke deals 1 damage to you for each card put into your hand this way. This card is the best. I love this card so much. So, why is this card so good? So, a couple things. 1, if you build your deck in a certain way, you will, on average, draw multiple cards, which is very strong. You can kind of cheat the count with cards like Cut Ribbons with Aftermath. For those who don't know, a double-sided card like Cut Ribbons adds both the costs together whenever something external checks its mana cost. So you can play 2-drop removal in the form of Cut, but then when you reveal Cut Ribbons off Demon Lord Belzenlocke, it counts as a 4-cost spell, you repeat the process. So you can do stuff like that. Other thing, just like with Zahid, Demon Lord Belzenlocke's body is huge. This beats everything, including Zahid. This beats Lyra, Zahid, Scarab God, Hazaret, Glorybringer, Rekindling Phoenix. Nothing in the format attacks into Belzenlocke. He blocks the format. Gearhulk doesn't matter. He's the biggest body in the format, and he gets cards on the way in. He's likely the best target to reanimate and recur through things like Liliana, just because you keep getting the enters the battlefield trigger. This is just like one of the best cards in the set, and is going to be one of the premier reasons to play things other than Torrential Gear Hulk in like blue-black, or even do black other colors, because Demon Lord Benzine approximates what Gear Hulk is trying to do enough, and is even bigger than Gear Hulk and blocks things better than Gear Hulk. So this card is very, very, very strong. It is going to be a mainstay in Standard. It's going to appear a lot. It's going to draw a bunch of cards. It's going to block a bunch of things that are also very large. I love Demon Lord Benzine. I'm going to play a huge amount with this card. It is going to just completely... I love it. I love it so much. So yeah, Demon Lord Benzine, super duper good. Divest. Divest is a new discard spell. 1 black, target player reveals his or her hand. You choose an artifact or creature card from it. That player discards that card. So this is an offshoot of Despise, which is a card that lets you look at your opponent's hand and get a creature card. This one is creature or artifact. I guess it depends how many like non-creature artifacts we are roaming around that we care about. This hits vehicles, for instance, which can certainly be relevant. This is much more reactive than Duress. Duress you generally use to take reactive cards from your opponent, try and protect your own spells, etc. Divest you want to use much more proactively to take your opponent's threats. That effect has generally been worse than Duress, unless the cards hit a wider swath of things. For example, Thoughtseize and Inquisition of Kozilek in Modern are played a lot because they hit most of the format. If we get to a spot where most of the common threats in the format are creatures and non-creature artifacts, then maybe Divest will have some play. And especially in the sideboard, there are certainly a lot of particular decks where most of their threats are just creatures. One drawback of this card is that it does not exile when it discards. There are a lot of embalmed creatures that you care about, a lot of things that can get back from the graveyard. So you may have them discard something only to have them get it back later. So it's mainly be a sideboard card, but there are certainly metas that can develop where this card becomes a reasonable thing to play in the main deck. Dreadshade. Dreadshade is the third mono-colored payoff card that we've seen, and I think this is one of the better ones. Dreadshade is triple black for a 3/3 with 1 black. Dreadshade gets +1/+1 until end of turn. The reason I think this card is so good is for a couple reasons. One, it has what I call a Schrodinger mechanic, where you do not need to invest the resource until you need to invest it. So, for example, if you have a Dreadshade in play, like you play your Dreadshade, your opponent doesn't kill it, you untap with 4 mana in play. Your Dreadshade is simultaneously a 3/3, a 4/4, a 5/5, a 6/6, and a 7/7, all at the same time. And it doesn't need to actually invest the mana to become one of those until it is necessary to do so. So if your opponent has like a 5/5 or whatever, you can just attack. And if they block, you make it a 6/6. And if they don't block, just damage happens. And then you can do something else. You never need to invest in the Shade Pump until it's necessary, which makes it incredibly strong. Aside from the fact that this is just a 3-drop that you can play early that is very good in the late game. That's just a mana sink unto itself. So Dreadshade is going to be one of the bigger incentives to play mono black. There are certainly a few of them, which we will certainly get to. A lot of them I'm excited about. But this is, I think, is one of the more powerful of the mono-colored payoff cards. They're all very powerful. I wouldn't classify any of them as bad. But this is definitely one of my favorites. Drudge Sentinel. Drudge Sentinel is a 3-mana 2/1 that has the ability to pay 3 mana to tap Drudge Sentinel. It gains indestructible until end of turn. I mean, that could be really annoying in Limited. This thing could be a really annoying wall in Limited. So, yeah. That's about all I see this card as, is something that like is a pretty large annoyance for your opponent in Limited. It's not the best card in the world, but it certainly seems playable. You have to see a lot about how much 2 power matters, how many cards that threatens to trade with, how many things that holds back, etc. But yeah, we might have some Drudge Sentineling going on in Limited. Definitely not for Constructed. The Eldest Reborn. So, the Eldest Reborn is a 5-mana saga. Chapter 1, each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Chapter 2, each opponent discards a card. And then Chapter 3, put target creature or planeswalker from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So this card is pretty slow. Chapter 1 is a 5-mana edict that can hit planeswalkers or creatures. Not very strong. Chapter 2 has each opponent discard a card that's really bad. At like this late stage in the game, that's happening at earliest turn 6. Although, to be fair, on turn 6, your opponent's hand is likely to consist of high-value cards. They played all the other ancillary stuff earlier, so maybe that's like better. But it might be so late in the game where they have nothing, is the concern, especially if you don't play this exactly on curve. So Chapter 2 may just be a brick. And then Chapter 3 allows you to reanimate a planeswalker or creature from either graveyard. A reasonably powerful effect, but you had to jump through a whole bunch of hoops and time to get there. So this seems underwhelming to me. It's not something I'm super interested in playing. I don't think that it's really worth the payoff on the back end. You can reanimate anything from your opponent's graveyard, which is relevant, but I think that the work you're putting in or the time you're investing don't make this worth it. I think this card is just going to be too slow in most cases in Constructed. Potentially a sideboard card if matchups are just about singular large creatures, potentially, but not something I'm interested in main deck. Eviscerate. Eviscerate is a 4-mana sorcery, destroy target creature. This will just be like the premier removal spell in Limited. Like, definitely draft this high. This is really good in Limited. Could be one of the better commons in black. And yeah, that's about it. Just draft this card if you're playing black. Feral Abomination. 6-mana 5/5 Death Touch. Stop putting Death Touch on giant idiots, please. Stop. Stop it. Yeah, reasonable thing to play in Limited if you're in black. Nothing lot to say about that. Final Parting. Final Parting, search your library for 2 cards, put one into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So this is a 5-mana diabolic tutor that lets you get a second card, but it goes to the graveyard. There's a lot of cards that, while in your graveyard, essentially count as cards, aftermath cards, for example, or if you have the ability to recur them with, for example, like the Mirari's Conjecture you got off of tutoring from this, or whatever you want to do, Torrential Gearhole, etc. 5 mana is a lot for a do-nothing card, as we've talked about before. You really need some payoff on the back end in order to justify 5 mana do-nothings, and I do not think that the payoff on the back end is high enough for this card. If you're doing something where you really need a specific card really badly, I would recommend playing Mastermind's Acquisition instead. It's 1 less mana, and you can get cards from your sideboard. Getting the additional card to the graveyard, well, like, solid value is generally not going to justify the additional mana cost and the fact that you could just play this and be dead. So, not something I'm super interested in Constructed. Probably seems reasonable in draft. Just tutor effects are good in draft, but again, 5 mana do-nothings, still bad. Fungal Infection. This is a card I actually think is pretty reasonable if we are in a green-black Sapperling deck. So target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Create a 1/1 green Sapperling creature token. This is very similar to, for anyone who's played Hearthstone, Blood to Ichor, which was a very good card back when that was legal. And this one is better in some circumstances, worse in others. This can actually kill things, and you still get the Sapperling regardless. It also is -1/-1, not damage, so your opponent could make an attack, and you use this as a combat trick, and maybe that matters. And they get a Sapperling. This is kind of like a Black Shock, because, say, for example, your opponent attacks with a 2 toughness creature, you can just Fungal Infection, give it -1/-1, block with the Sapperling. So I think there's a lot of versatility in this card, and if you're already in the business of wanting a large number of Sapperlings, this helps in that regard. And it's actually a solid interactive spell in the early turns on things like Bomat Courier and Earthshaker Kenra. It kills like a fair number of things you care about. And even on Crop Crasher, you can just block with the Sapperling. So Fungal Infection I actually think is pretty good. Obviously, it's competing with Fatal Push, and maybe the upside of the Sapperling isn't worth it in a lot of cases, but in spots where you really care about the Sapperlings, it seems like this is going to be better. Ooh, now we have Liliana's brother, Josu Ves, Lich Knight. 4 mana, 4/5 Menace with a kicker of 6. When Josu Ves, Lich Knight enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create 8 2/2 black Zombie Knight creature tokens with Menace. This card's really good. So I was considering playing this card before I realized it has Menace and before the zombies had Menace. But a 4-mana 4/5 is solid rate that blocks pretty much everything that's happening on turn 3 and 4. It even survives Glorybringer on the following turn. Survives Chandra. It's in a good spot in those respects. It has Menace, so if you're inclined to get aggressive, it can do so very efficiently. 5 toughness is going to allow it to block most things. And if you ever draw this in the late game, with a card we'll talk about later that can generate a bunch of excess mana, this, like, you just win. Unless they need some kind of sweeper or they're just dead. Most decks will just die to a kick to Josu Vess. You're attacking for like 20 something. So Josu Vess is really good. I would play a 4-mana 4/5 with Menace, and the fact that when I draw it later I can kick it for 1,000,000 zombies is awesome. So like we talked about before, versatility is worth a huge amount, and the versatility on this card is, like, both sides of it are very good. Like, you might play 10 mana Mega 4/5 and 8 2/2 zombies, and I would definitely play 4 mana 4/5 Menace. So both sides of this are good rate, and the versatility is good in different stages of the game. So Josu Vess is super good. Khasra Sengir Pureblood. I don't want to talk about this card. I find this card offensive. This card is offensive to the great lineage of Olivia Voldaren. But in any case, Khasra Sengir Pureblood. 7 mana, 4/4 flying. Whenever a creature an opponent controls is dealt damage, put a 1/1 counter on Khasra Sengir Pureblood. Khasra deals 2 damage to target creature. Now, granted, this card is probably nutso bonkers and limited. You probably just win the game with it. But in Constructed, this is a huge meme. It's going to die to the universe. It's not going to do anything. It's 4 mana for 2 damage, which is not a relevant number on turn 8. So, in limited, if you can get to 7 mana, fire this up. If you can't and are playing any other format, don't. Knight of Malice. This is the counterpart of the Knight of Glory we saw earlier. It's the same card. 2 mana, 2/2 Knight, first strike, hexproof from white, and gets +1 if any player controls a white permanent. So like I said, this could be part of a white-black Knights deck if you want to combine the two, or it could just be a 2-drop for black decks to try and stabilize the board early. 2/2 first strike blocks a lot of what's going on in the early game. You have a couple options of how you want to play this card, whether you try to like maximize it with its friends or not. But this could obviously show up in the Knight deck. It could show up in black midrange decks. It's just a reasonable 2-drop. Lich's Mastery. Lich's Mastery is a 6-mana legendary enchantment with hexproof that says you can't lose the game. And then some other stuff. Whenever you gain life, draw that many cards. Whenever you lose life, for each 1 life you lost, exile a permanent you control or a card from your hand or graveyard. When Lich's Mastery leaves the battlefield, you lose the game. So, this is a really cool card that changes the texture of what is important within the game. This makes it so conventional life loss doesn't really work against you anymore. It still matters. You still have to exile or sacrifice things, but you're not like dying to it. And it makes any life gain spells really sick card draw. So, this is a card I think is not super competitive, but I think is powerful enough to potentially be. Obviously, there's a bunch of matchups where playing a 6-mana do-nothing enchantment is just going to result in you being dead next turn. Or, in this case, sacrificing a number of permanents that will likely lose you the game. But what you would optimally want to do with Lich's Mastery is have a very large graveyard so that you can exile cards from the graveyard instead of sacrificing actual permanents or discarding cards from your hand if you were to take damage. So I think Lich's Mastery might have legs in Constructed. You have to jump through a lot of hoops to do it, and it certainly seems like a fun card to play with. But you have to do a lot and change the texture of your deck to do so, and you have to be on a pretty clean board when you play Lich's Mastery. Although, you can combine it with this next card to do that, Phyrexian Scriptures. Phyrexian Scriptures is a 4-mana Mythic Saga. Chapter 1, put a 1/1 counter on a creature. It becomes an artifact in addition to its other types. Chapter 2, destroy all non-artifact creatures. Chapter 3, exile all cards from an opponent's graveyard. So, This is a card that, for example, if you played on turn 4, or I guess played on turn 5, you could like put a counter on some creature you control or just have it do nothing, whatever. And then untap, destroy all non-artifact creatures, play Lich's Mastery on a clean board, and now you have the game set up to win from there with Lich's Mastery. The main strength of the card for Axion Scriptures is the fact that the Wrath happens on a turn that you did not invest mana. So even though it is delayed by 1 turn, that next turn, if you're not dead already, is going to be incredibly powerful because you're going to sweep the board and then do something. Like sweep the board, play Lich's Mastery, or sweep the board, play Liliana. You just are guaranteed to be ahead on board after Phyrexian Scriptures Chapter 2 triggers, if the opponent's deck is about creatures. So Phyrexian Scriptures is definitely very strong. There's a lot of ways to leverage this and have incredibly powerful turns off Chapter 2. The obvious main downside is that it's delayed a turn. If you need a sweeper on 4, too bad. You have to wait a turn. If you need a sweeper and you top deck this card, you have to wait a turn. So there's definitely downsides to this card. It's not just like super awesome all the time. You need to add complementary pieces to support the fact that it's a delayed turn and have stuff to capitalize on the turn where you wipe the board and then play something. But just as long as you keep all that stuff in mind, it's going to be a really good card and going to be super powerful. Also, the incidental exiling all cards in the opponent's graveyard is going to be good in a lot of matchups. Lingering Phantom. Lingering Phantom is a 6-mana 5/4. Whenever you cast a historic spell, you may pay black. If you do, return Lingering Phantom from your graveyard to your hand. This card seems super strong and limited. It's probably too expensive and constructed. Even though you get to recur it a bunch, you're recurring a 6-mana 5/4. That's like not interesting. But in limited, recurring like anything is good. Just anything that like is a reasonable size. So this card seems really, really strong and limited. Definitely going to be one of the higher end black cards. Something you may even want to build around. But yeah, not really for constructed. Super good limited though. Rat Colony. 2-mana 2/1. Rat Colony gets +1 attack for each other rat you control. A deck can have any number of cards named Rat Colony. Yeah, if you want to, this is our new Relentless Rats. It's funny because they keep printing Relentless Rats cards, but then it like defeats the purpose of the fact that you can run a number of all these cards. It's a little bit amusing. But yeah, if you want to play a bunch of rats, this is your card. Not really, in my opinion, super powerful in either format, either draft or constructed. But if you want to play a bunch of rats in your deck, go have fun, go nuts. Rite of Benzine Locke. 4 mana, Chapter 1 and 2, create 2 0/1 Black Cleric creature tokens. Chapter 3, create a 6/6 Black Demon creature token with Flying and Trample. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice another creature. If you can't, this creature deals 6 damage to you. So this one's not that great. The better part of this card is actually creating the 4 tokens. Maybe there is a deck that just wants the tokens. Granted, they are 0/1s, so you need to be doing other stuff to get value from them. But just making a 6/6 Benzine Locke, as good as that body is that we talked about, the 6/6 flying trample body, this seems like a lot of work to get there. This seems like not worth it. So my inclination is that this card is not very good. Not something I'd be interested in doing in constructed. But if this card does see any amount of play, I imagine it's actually going to be because of the creating 4 clerics part of it. That I think matters more than making the 6/6. Settle the Score. Settle the Score is a 4-mana sorcery that exiles target creature and then puts 2 loyalty counters on a planeswalker you control. Now, in general, this is going to be worse than Vraska's Contempt because A, it is a sorcery, and B, it does not hit planeswalkers. But the upside is notable. For example, if you play a Liliana on a fairly clean board, like they have 1 creature, play a zombie, chump block with the zombie, you untap. If you settle the score of that creature, you can ult Liliana immediately. Granted, in the case of the 5-mana Liliana, that's not very good because all she does is destroy all non-zombie creatures, and presumably don't have many creatures after you just killed one. But this applies to a lot of planeswalkers that if you plus in the first turn and they don't take damage and you untap, settle the score puts them to ultimate. So that's something to keep in mind. I think in general, you're just going to still want to run Vraska's Contempt. But if you're interested in going deep, trying to high roll people, Cell of Score definitely has some upside alongside various Planeswalkers. Soul Salvage, 2 mana in the black, return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. Cards like this are generally not super powerful. This is a 2-for-1, but you need to build your graveyard up first. It's not something you can use proactively in the early game to smooth out your draw. It's just pure card advantage. And in that case, it's something you could certainly play, but I do think there are better options available for recurring things in Standard, like Liliana, Yawgmoth's Vile Offering, which we'll get to. This seems like one of the more underwhelming ways to recur creatures, and not something I'm particularly interested in doing. Certainly not constructed, possibly limited. StrongholdConfessor. 1 mana 1/1 with Kicker 3 and Menace. If StrongholdConfessor was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 2 additional +1/+1 counters. So this is a 1 mana 1/1 Menace, or a 4 mana 3/3 Menace. I think both of those are reasonable rates in limited. If there's an aggressive black deck, this guy's probably going to be a higher priority pick, just because of how good Menace is. He gets to chip in for a bunch of damage over time. But for constructed, not really what we're looking for. Thallid Omnivore, 4 mana 3/3, sacrifice another creature. Thallid Omnivore gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If a Sapperling was sacrificed away, gain 2 life. This is another limited card for the Sapperling archetype. It's actually pretty good in limited, because again, you can, if they have like a 4/4, you can attack with Thallid Omnivore, and if they block, you sacrifice. If they don't, you don't sacrifice. So there's a lot of play with this card. It is reasonably good. It can like hold back stuff. The rate isn't good enough for constructed, but this actually seems very powerful in limited. Thallid Soothsayer, 4 mana 2/3, fungus, 2 mana, sacrifice a creature, draw a card. This can certainly be something that you might play in the constructed Thallid deck. Having a sack outlet for value is definitely something that those decks like to have, although we're about to get to a better one, in my opinion. But this is something that can certainly show up in the sideboard, most likely. Not really a card I would be comfortable main decking, but if you are in the business of turning your Thallids and Sapperlings into cards, this is the way to do it. And it's not the worst rate in the world, I guess, even though it's like not great. There's probably better ways to do this, to be honest, but we'll see. Likely limited, possibly constructed. This is the better constructed sack outlet for your Sapperling deck. Togar, Famine Incarnate, is an 8 mana, not really though, 7/6. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. This spell's cost is reduced by 2 colorless for each creature you sacrifice this way. So at maximum, you could sacrifice 3 creatures to reduce this card's cost to 2 black. You can't reduce the black cost by that ability. And when Togar, Famine Incarnate enters the battlefield, up to 1 target player's life total becomes half of their starting life total rounded down. So you get to make either you or your opponent's life total 10. So this card I actually think is very good, because it mainly is a 2 mana 7/6. There are a lot of token generators, which we're going to get to shortly, that enable this card to be played for a very small amount of mana, and reducing your opponent's life total to 10 and then going wide around them with Song of Frailes can definitely put a big hurting on them. And even against mono red, if you're at like 4 and in danger of getting burned out, you can play Taragar and put yourself to 10 and be comfortably out of burn range. So this card I think is very strong. It's going to be one of the main incentives to play the aristocrat style build of Sapperlings if you're interested in doing that, instead of just playing a swarm style build. So there's a bunch of ways you can build a Sapperling deck. This would be like one of the bigger payoffs for doing it the aristocrat style way instead of just the go wide way. Yep. Welcome Helic Strasse to Magic the Gathering. Orgoros the Empty One, 6 mana 4/3 flying. As a fly flies in my face. Whenever Orgoros the Empty One deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card at random. If that player can't, you draw a card. This actually seems like a reasonable limited card. Obviously, you can't play 6 mana for a 4/3 constructed. That doesn't play. But in limited, this body is reasonable enough, and it has ongoing value throughout the course of the game to potentially draw your cards or remove your opponent's cards. Seems like something that I wouldn't hate to play in a drafted deck. So yeah, mainly limited, not really for constructed. Vicious Offering. This is an interesting card. It is a 2-minute instant with kicker, sacrifice a creature. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. If this spell was kicked, they get -5/-5 instead. So, if you're playing some aristocrat style Sapperling deck like we were just talking about, this may be your removal spell of choice. -5/-5 is a flashpoint that kills most things in the format. It's possible you'd want to play this instead of Fatal Push or Vraska's Contempt, or in complement of one of those. I think in general it's going to be worse than running one of those other two ones because it doesn't exile and you are paying a much higher cost for it, but it's possible this sees a non-zero amount to play in a deck like making a bunch of expendable creatures. Whisper Blood Liturgist is a 4-mana 2/2 legendary human cleric that has the ability to tap, sacrifice 2 creatures, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is another card that could potentially be played in the aristocrat style deck. Granted, it is a 4-mana 2/2, which is rough, that dies to the universe. But if you get to untap with this card, you could like recur Togar or like whatever other big thing. For example, Thorn Elemental. There's like potentially big things you can play with this deck to enable. I think that it's going to be too fragile to really work constructed. Maybe this is something you can side in against decks you know aren't packing the kind of removal that punishes this card. But in general, I think it's going to be not good enough just because of how fragile the body is. Windgrace Acolyte. 5-mana 3/2 flyer. When Windgrace Acolyte enters the battlefield, put the top 3 cards of your library into the graveyard and you gain 3 life. Seems like a very, very aggressively medium draft card. It is a cat warrior, though. Oh, it's the cat is riding the pterodactyl thing. Okay, I get it. So yeah, it's a cat warrior. That's the best part about this card. Not interested. Next. Yargle. Okay, this card's great. Yargle, Glutton of Urborg. So the reason this card is great is a 5-mana 9/3. And you would think that after 25 years of Magic, we would have had creatures printed at every possible power and toughness combination. But you would be wrong. There has never been a 9/3 before. And now we have a 9/3. So, when you are playing in a GP and you lose your winning in for top 8, you can now say, I'm a Yargle. I went 9/3. That is the best part about this card. We now have a thing to refer to people who went 9/3 at tournaments. That's far and away the best part about this card. And the fact that the name is Yargle is super great. So yeah. This is not really a good card in the actual game. It's just funny that we now have a 9/3 card and his name is Yargle. I'm here for that. Now we get to one of the most flavorful cards of the set and one of the most powerful cards of the set in Yawgmoth's Vile Offering. So, Yawgmoth's Vile Offering is the black legendary sorcery. For a reminder, legendary sorceries require that you have a planeswalker or legendary creature in play in order to cast them. It is 5 mana. Put up to 1 target creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and then destroy up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. Exile Yawgmoth's Vile Offering. It's really good they made this not recurable. So this is a card that you can play it if you have a legendary card already in play, kill something, and then get something back from either graveyard. Worth noting, you can't get back the thing you just killed because of the order of the way this is worded. They did that on purpose. But the cool thing, like, I just love, this is like one of the most exceptional examples of top-down design I've ever seen, where the story, for those who don't know, that is taking place in the card is Yawgmoth, one of the first big bads in Magic, telling Gerard that if he brings him the head of Urza, he will bring back his wife back to life. Gerard does that, as you can see in the art. He is bringing the head of Urza to Yawgmoth. And the flavor of this card is, if you have a legendary creature, Gerard, you kill a creature, Urza, to get back a creature, Gerard's wife. That's like super, super cool. I love that. That it's just like exactly lines up to the story of the card is telling. In addition to the card being exceptionally powerful, this is a card I want to, like, when I was talking about recurring Benzine Locke, this is one of the cards I was referring to. Playing this in Liliana and Benzine Locke just allows you to keep, like, doing Benzine Locke things a whole bunch and then drawing more Yawgmoth's Vile Offerings and Lilianas to do more Benzine Locks, and it's a lot. So this card is very strong. It's going to be played a lot. I love it a lot. The fact that it does not exile on the removal side isn't the best, but won't matter too much in most cases to make this card not good enough. I'm just super excited to play it. It makes every creature in your graveyard a Necrotal. Like if I have a Benzine Locke in my graveyard, I play Yawgmoth's Vile Offering, and it's just Benzine Locke, kill your thing. That's incredibly impactful on the board. So this is going to be a really, really, really big deal in Standard. Yeah, I love it. It's great. I'm playing with Benzine Locke and Liliana and have a great time.